Have you ever caught your reflection doing something you're not? A question that seems absurd yet terrifyingly real for our protagonist, a regular guy leading an ordinary life. Let's call him John. John, like any of us, never gave much thought to his reflection. It was just him mirrored back. But then, one day, something shifted. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning. John, freshly showered, stood before the mirror, combing his hair. That's when he noticed it for the first time. His mirrored self seemed off. Not a dramatic distortion, but subtle, like a shadow that lingers even when the sun has set. It was his reflection, but it wasn't him. It was a figure that carried his likeness, but with a sinister twist. John blinked, shook his head, and laughed it off. It's funny, he thought, how the mind can play tricks when you're not fully awake. But as he turned away, he couldn't shake off the lingering sense of unease, like a chill that creeps up your spine and refuses to let go. Days turned into weeks, and the shadowy figure in the mirror became a constant presence. It was always there, lurking in the reflection, mirroring John's actions, but with an eerie, unsettling twist. It's like the figure was mimicking him, but in a way that was subtly twisted, a cruel parody of his daily life. John tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that it was a figment of his imagination, but the figure persisted. Every glance in the mirror was met with that shadowy reflection, a sinister doppelganger. It was as if the figure was trying to communicate something, but what? Was it a warning, a threat, or a call for help? John's ordinary life had turned into a nightmare that he couldn't wake up from. He was trapped in a reality where his own reflection had become his biggest fear. He felt the walls of his sanity closing in, but he held on, hoping it was just a phase, just his mind playing tricks on him. But as days turned into weeks, the figure became more distinct, more real. What would you do if your worst nightmare lived in your mirror? Imagine the terrifying ordeal of our protagonist, a man who sees a sinister figure lurking in his own reflection, a figure that no one else seems to see, a figure that seems to exist only within the silvered glass of his mirror. Every time he gazes into the mirror, the figure is there, staring back, silent, menacing. The figure that only he can see is always there, lurking in the periphery of his vision, a constant reminder of his growing fear. In his desperate attempts to share his fears, he turns to his friends and family, hoping, praying that someone would believe him, that someone would see what he sees. But his pleas fall on deaf ears. His friends dismiss his claims, attributing them to stress. His family chalks it up to an overactive imagination. He is left alone, isolated in his fear. What might have started as a minor curiosity, a strange anomaly, now begins to consume his every waking moment. His life, once full of joy and laughter, has now been replaced by fear and paranoia. He starts to avoid mirrors, shunning the reflective surfaces that bring him face to face with his tormentor. His world shrinks, limited to spaces free of mirrors. His life becomes a constant dance, a ballet of avoidance. He finds himself constantly looking over his shoulder, always fearing the moment he might inadvertently catch a glimpse of his reflection. His heart pounds in his chest with every passing second, his mind teetering on the edge of sanity. He lives in constant fear, a prisoner in his own home. His life, once vibrant and full, is now reduced to a lonely existence. The fear is overwhelming, the isolation unbearable. His quiet desperation echoes in the silence of his home, a grim testament to his plight. And then, in his darkest hour, a decision is made. A decision born out of despair, but also of hope. A decision that could either free him from his torment or plunge him deeper into his nightmare. In his despair, he decided to confront the figure. Facing your fears is never easy, especially when they look back at you. This is the moment our protagonist has been steeling himself for. The confrontation, a showdown with the shadowy figure that has been haunting his every reflection. The protagonist stands tall, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He stares into the mirror, meeting the gaze of the figure lurking in his reflection. The figure is silent, its presence as chilling as the Arctic wind. Its eyes, though just a reflection, seem to pierce through the glass, penetrating the very depths of his soul. Undeterred, the protagonist squares his shoulders, challenging the figure. He demands answers, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Who are you?" he asks, his voice trembling slightly. "What do you want from me?" His questions hang in the air, unanswered. The figure says nothing. It just stares back at him, its sinister smile growing wider with each passing second. A smile that sends a shiver down his spine. A smile that promises nothing but darkness. There's a cruel satisfaction in its silence, an unspoken taunt that sends a wave of dread washing over him. The protagonist swallows hard, his throat dry. He continues to question the figure, his voice growing more desperate with each passing second. But the figure remains silent. Its smile never fades. It just stares back at him, as if mocking his attempts for answers. In that moment, a chilling realization dawns upon him. The figure in the mirror isn't just a reflection. It's not a figment of his imagination. It's not a trick of the light. It's something else. Something far more sinister. Something that's been lurking in his reflection, waiting for the right moment to strike. In the silence, he realized, the figure wasn't just a reflection, it was something else. It was a confrontation not with a mere image, but with a malevolent entity that had been hiding in plain sight, biding its time, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal its true nature. Have you ever wondered what secrets your reflection hides? A question that our protagonist found himself asking more often than he'd like. As the sinister figure in his mirror continued to torment him, he knew he had to dig deeper, to unravel the mystery that was slowly consuming his life. And so began his journey into the abyss of ancient legends and folklore, a world where reality and fantasy intertwine, a world where mirror entities were more than just figments of imagination. He pored over dusty old books and lost manuscripts, his eyes scanning lines of cryptic texts, hunting for answers. He stumbled upon tales of shadowy figures that lurked in mirrors, entities that fed off the fear and despair of their victims. It was said that these malevolent beings existed in a parallel world, a world that could be accessed through mirrors' windows into their dark realm. These entities, he discovered, were not just reflections. They were dangerous predators, waiting for the right moment to strike, to prey on the vulnerable. The figure in his mirror, he realized, was one such entity, a creature that had somehow found a way into his life, a creature that was now intent on causing him harm. His heart pounded in his chest as the weight of his discovery sank in. He was not just dealing with a reflection, he was dealing with a creature from a world beyond his understanding. A world that was as terrifying as it was fascinating. But knowledge, as they say, is power. And with this newfound knowledge, he felt a spark of hope, a glimmer of light in the darkness that had become his life. He understood now, understood what he was up against, understood the danger that lurked in his mirror. He knew now that he was not alone in his fight. He had the knowledge, the weapon he needed to confront the shadowy figure that haunted his reflection. He was ready to take back control, ready to face his fear, ready to fight. Armed with knowledge, he knew what he had to do. The moment of truth, when man meets monster, who will prevail? The air is heavy with anticipation, as our protagonist, armed with newfound knowledge, faces his reflection for the final time. No longer a passive victim, he is ready to take a stand against the shadowy figure that has caused him such torment. The confrontation is not for the faint-hearted. The figure, sensing the protagonist's determination, responds with a dark fury never before seen. It writhes and twists in the mirror, its malevolent presence filling the room with an icy chill. The struggle between them is palpable, echoing in the silent house. The protagonist, though terrified, does not waver. He knows that this is his only chance to reclaim his life from the entity.